Democratic Whip, Mr. Hoyer.
I thank
The gentleman from Maryland
is
is recognized for 3 minutes.
I was here in 1981. They said the 1981 bill would pay for itself. David Stockman, a former colleague from Michigan, was here, and he was at OMB then. And a few years later, he wrote a book, and he said, I said it would pay for itself, and I knew that was not true. The same could be said of this bill. Mr. Speaker, history will indeed remember this vote. Future generation of Americans will remember who cast their votes to raise taxes on 86 million middle-class households and heap another $1.5 trillion in deficits onto our children and to our grandchildren. They will remember who cast their votes for a plan that gives 83% of its benefits to 1% of the American people. They will remember that President Trump promised that the middle class would get a tax cut and the wealthy individuals like him would not, before turning his back on that promise. They will remember those who cast their votes to kick 13 million Americans off their health insurance coverage. And they will remember those who acted with the full knowledge that their votes would trigger a $25 billion cut in Medicare. I know you said you're going to waive it, which will simply add $25 billion more to the deficit, but posterity will also remember those who stood up in the face of this dangerous and partisan bill and said no. And those of us who vote against it are doing so not because we oppose tax reform. On the contrary, we recognize, as most Americans do, that this bill is not tax reform. It is a tax giveaway to those who don't need our help, paid for by those who do. This is a reckless and dangerous deficit spending at its worst. In 1986, Democrats and Republicans worked together in good faith and over many months in an open, transparent, and regular order process to craft real bipartisan tax reform that helped the middle class without adding a dime to the deficit. Not a single dime. This has not been an open process. This has not been bipartisan. This has not been transparent or through regular order. This raises taxes, as I said, on 86 million Americans who will pay more taxes 10 years from now than they do today. This gives 83% of the tax cuts to the top 1%. Not the $59,000 family that Paul Ryan talked about, but to those families making over $900,000 a year.
The gentleman an additional 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for an additional 1 minute.
And this bill adds $1.5 trillion to the deficit. This is not tax reform. So Republicans may pat themselves on the back in the coming days for having finally passed something out of Congress. Unfortunately, it's a bad thing. I urge them to remember that this vote may be the most consequential in their careers. Not positively. I say to my friends across the aisle, stand up and say no with us and commit to start working on a product all members of the chamber can be proud of, as was the case in 1986. That's what Ronald Reagan did. In 1986, Reagan did not go down this reckless and irresponsible path. Stand up for the principles you used to espouse, but are now about to abandon. Stand up for fiscal responsibility. Stand up for the middle class. Stand up for what the American people hope we would do. This is not it.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from South Dakota, Ms. Noem.
Gentlelady from South Dakota is recognized.